Good morning. So there's a chapter somebody pointed out to me in Matthew, chapter and verse, which is, I'm going to read from the Young's Literal Translations. It's Matthew 17:1. So chapter 17, verse 1. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments did become white as the light. Now there's so many passages in the Bible, in the four Gospels, which refer to Jesus as the light. Okay? And so, Jesus is the light. And if you understand that, then the rest of the story makes sense. If you think that Jesus was an actual human, it's all very hard to understand, and then you have to have all this faith that this stuff really happened, and you have to be a believer. If you understand that it's a story about the light, then it's pretty obvious that it's a story, it's a fictional story, and then you can see the meaning of the story because it's just a story about, okay, let's put it this way. The light is the light of truth and wisdom, right? Someone who's a truthful person, who lives a virtuous, righteous life. That's the light, right? They're living, they're like, you could say they're disciples of the light. The light being the light of truth, right? And so it's not a physical light. There's no energy photons. There's no photons in this light. It's a metaphor for the light, the photon light of the sun or of the stars, but mainly the sun. Those photons that you see emanating out of that radiation ball is a metaphor for this other thing, which is a spiritual thing of truth. And so this truth and this virtue and the people that have that, they have the light of truth, right? So Jesus symbolizes this thing that we call truth and wisdom and virtue and doing what is right. It all be boiled down to this understanding of this is the God of Israel, right? This is what they're worshiping, is that. So, of course, it's portrayed as the sun. The sun is a symbol for that, just as really, just as an idol could be, right? But they don't build idols, and they're not really worshiping the sun in the sky. However, it does seem that they kind of are. They're worshiping it as a symbol for this other thing, so that they can like they're looking at the universe and seeing how does it parallel this higher order of spirituality that we can't see. Well, it's like the sun, okay? So obviously that's astrotheology. If you know anything about astrotheology, you would already know that. But when you're reading the story of Jesus, you get in these big debates with people, which I've been getting in, and it's quite interesting and fun. You have atheists who will tell you that Jesus, well, they'll tell you two things. They'll say the whole thing's just made up, or he really lived. He really lived, and he was a Jewish man, and he really lived. In fact, that's being pushed by a lot of people in the media. He was Jewish. He was a communist, right? That's what, if you watch PBS or something, they'll tell you he was a Jewish communist. And then you have the Talmudists who say he was a real man, and he was a Jewish man who went against the Jewish laws, and so they had to punish him. Right? And then you have some Christian sects that say, yeah, he was a real man and he really walked on the earth, and all those groups are wrong about it. He's clearly a fictional character. Now the atheists will say he's fictional and it's all BS. What I'm saying is it's a fictional story and it's about the truth. So the thing that the story's arranged around, it's a story about the truth, which is symbolized as the light. Now, if you know astrotheology, that's very clear to you, okay? If you're just learning about it, then that's what we're talking about here. Now, what's interesting is, so he was transfigured. So the Muslims would say, well, Jesus wasn't God. He was a prophet. And they built this story of Jesus the prophet because they're trying to think of him in terms the same as the Talmudists, the same as the atheists, and the same as the Christian sects, that he was an actual man that walked the earth. Okay? Now, is that what the original Christians believed? I don't think so. I think that they looked up at the sun in the sky. Okay? I don't know what the sun is in your language. In Latin, I think it's sol, S-O-L. I think in African language or Middle Eastern language, I don't know what it is, okay? But it's the light that emanates in the sky, that big light that makes the plants grow. We call it the sun. I've had this confusion with certain people in Africa. They think I'm talking about Jesus is the Son of God, like Father and Son. Well, that was the metaphor, and that's so when you're looking at the sun in the sky, the early Christians, before they were called Christians and before they wrote the Bible, probably were designating that star in the sky, which we call the sun, as being God's, the Son of God. In other words, the Father Son, or the Father Creator God, gave us this light that goes across the sky, which we call the sun. Whatever they called it then, I don't know what they called it. Okay, but that's what we're talking about here. Now that fits in with astrotheology, because in astrotheology, in the Greek and the Roman and the ancient Sumerian and Egyptian, there's this genealogy of gods, right? And so there's somewhere along the line, there's an original God that creates the other gods, right? Well, that's the same thing we have in Christianity. We have the Creator God giving us a star, which we call the sun, which gives us the light of the world. So it's literally the light of the world, and it's metaphorically the light of the world as truth, as wisdom, as knowing, staying away from evil and going with the good, and being merciful and just and righteous. All of those good qualities. It's a quality of a human being, of the soul, right? So that's obviously pretty clear. Now, but if you listen to like Christian preachers and stuff, they'll go on these long rants about how, Jesus, like the story's real, and they'll try to explain it in terms of, I don't know. They go into these like overkill on the minutia of the story, the details of the story, and none of it really happened. It's a fictional account, and so if you don't realize that it's a fictional account, you lose the meaning of the story. It becomes meaningless, or you end up worshiping a false god because you're given a false story to believe in, and so you're not likely to understand it and see what is being pointed out as the thing to worship. So here's the other part of this. So what I'm suggesting is, most likely when they're saying that God sent someone here to live among us, the man they're referring to that lived among them, that they followed and that was teaching them, was the sun in the sky, and it was a metaphor for this transcendent idea of truth and the Creator and all these high level spiritual concepts, right? But it's all being symbolized around the sun. Now you see that in some of the early Eastern Orthodox churches, where Jesus is depicted at the center of the zodiac, and surrounding him is the disciples, and around and a ring around that you'll have the different animals of the zodiac. So that's not unusual, because you'll see that in many different churches, in the Eastern Orthodox churches, with early Christianity. So what happened at some point was, you got to understand, like, how did it become a sun symbolized anyway? Well, we see that in the Old Testament. We see the ark, the golden ark, and the 12 tribes. Well, here we're beginning to see in the Old Testament the sun symbolism and the zodiac symbolism being instituted as the basic orthodoxy of the Bible religion. But what I'm suggesting is that there was a transition at some point where because when you look at the word Yahoo or Yahuwah, I believe that it was originally, most likely, a reference to the moon, although it could have been a reference to the sun. But I've gone through it and suggested that was a moon tribe, the Yahuwah tribe. But let's take a look at the word El. I've also suggested in earlier videos that El comes from Ilu, which is wind. In ancient Babylonian, it's the Enlil, which is the wind god. And that's the origin of the word. But at some point, the word El then became associated with also Baal, which means Lord God. It started out with wind, then it became associated with storms, okay? So wind, just like the wind, that's why God breathes the breath of the life, the spirit is symbolized as the wind. So Enlil, Enlil was the wind god. And that's where we get El. And Lil, Ilu, Bab El. It comes from this and Lil. But then what happened is there's a transition where El just generally means God. And we see that in the Aramaic with Elohim. So it went from Enlil to El. At some point, just kind of El was generally, we see that with Baal. Baal is the Lord God. And then the Muslims continued to call God El with Allah. So that's what we're talking about. But at some point, because it went, let me start from the beginning of that timeline. It goes from wind god to storm god. Because Baal was really a god of storms and agriculture, right? Because the storms and they bring the rain. You got thunderbolts. So it shifted. The first shift was from wind to storms. So now it's a storm god. At some point, and it looks to me like this point happened around, certainly with the Romans, but probably maybe before that with the Greeks. Probably with, I'm going to think around the time of the Romans, El became associated with the moon. Well, Helio, is that Greek or Roman? You'll have to look it up. I'm not sure. But Helio, which is a sun, became associated with El. And this happened some point when the Greeks, there was Greek-speaking people there right through the Roman time, but sometime around there, El becomes associated with Helio. But did it happen earlier? Because I'm looking at the Old Testament too, and we're seeing the God of Israel, and also whether they call it Israel or they call it Yahu, and that's what the Jews called it, being associated or identified with the Golden Ark and the 12. So it could have happened earlier. But at some point, there's a transition where it's no longer Baal, the storm god. It's a god which is truly transcends the world, but is symbolized as the sun and the 12. Let's put it that way. It symbolizes the sun and the 12, but those are the symbols being used for this thing that's transcends the physical universe. Okay. Now, so there was a transition there, and the reason I can say, like, if you look at when that occurred, I don't know exactly, because it's hard to say exactly when the word changed its meaning from being a wind god to a storm god, and now to being associated with the sun. But that's about how it happened. When exactly those things happen, I don't know, but you can see that progression taking out throughout the Bible. And so when we're reading the story of Jesus, what likely happened before they wrote the story is that they were looking at the sun as being sent by God as their teacher. And this is their teacher that's teaching them about life. It's teaching them about, they wanted to be like the sun. See, if you have a spirit like the sun, you're truthful, you're honest, you're bright, let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. He's in heaven. He's going across the sky in heaven. That's your Father. So that's how they're viewing it. They're viewing it in astrotheological terms, but there is a transcendent idea there that transcends the physical universe, and it's a story of the human soul. So the symbolism of the sun is the sun is symbolizing the human soul that you have within you, and that's what you're supposed to be like. You're supposed to be like the sun. That's pretty easy to understand, right? Now, they don't teach you that in Christianity because they don't know that. They think this is all literal. In other words, the Christian churches are very much like the Talmudists, much like the atheists, and much like the Muslims in making Jesus into a truly was a man that walked the earth and was really attacked by the Pharisees and nailed to a cross by the Romans, and this is all a true story. You're going to miss the story. If you believe that, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not going to understand what the story's about, and so you're not going to really get it. So I'm hoping that you can look at it through an astrotheological understanding, because then it all becomes very clear to you. And what are some of the other things we were talking about? The other things we were debating is what's the name of God? You know, everyone's like, you have to call it this and you have to call it that, and there was no J in the original books. You know, well, it was written in Greek, and the reason why it's called Jesus and not Yashu anymore, or Yashu or Yashu, is because the Greeks pronounce Yashu as Yasus. So they wrote it as Yasus. And there is they say there was no J in the old alphabet. Well, there was a Yod, right? Yod is a Y. Well, J, I, and Y are all J, I, and Y are all the equivalents. So our J is the equivalent of the Yod. So Yasus, or we call it Jesus, but it was Yasus, is Yashu. So Yashu to the Greeks was Yashus. Yasus. It's just a variation of the word. The other thing is, what's God's name? Well, God transcends the universe. He's the creator. And it's not even, there's no sex like male and female because it's a spirit. So it's just a thinking entity. And I mean, you're a thinking entity. You have a body which has male and female. Okay. Now, well, hold on. Now, don't think that I'm promoting some kind of idea of this trans stuff because they're trying to say that you can change your body into these other things and stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that God, the creator, creates two sexes, right? That's the whole foundation of the entire universe is positive and negative. But the thing creating that is neither of those things because it's not part of the universe. It's outside the universe. So it's not like it has no physical form to have any of those qualities of an anatomy of a body. That's what I'm suggesting. That it's there is no anatomy to this thing called the creator. The human soul has no anatomy. The physical world does. And so it's created and it has a certain design, right? And that's how things survive is by the way it's designed. It's designed to survive. It's designed to reproduce. So that's what I'm suggesting. Anyway, that's the end of this video, and hopefully that you find it interesting. Okay, have a good day.